In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a fascinating conversation with Chad Ramage, founder of Accessibility in the City, an online mapping solution that helps support those with accessibility issues with navigation. As a wheelchair user himself, who is actively working on an innovative solution to an accessibility problem, I knew Chad was going to be an excellent guest for our Mobility March series. In this episode, Chad tells us about his background in information technology and his passion for accessibility, including his experiences using a wheelchair that really sparked his interest in the smart community and accessibility space. Chad and I discuss what a smart community actually is and why the concepts of accessibility and inclusion are so important, plus the need for genuine consultation on accessibility solutions with the people who have accessibility issues. We talk about how data can help Chad with planning accessible journeys and all about his platform to help others do just that. Chad explains accessibility in the city, including how it works and who is using it so far. We discuss why accessibility needs to be a key area for local government and how increasing accessibility also means increasing social inclusion and quality of life. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trend of data security and privacy for everyone, but especially how that impacts people with disabilities and other vulnerable community members, plus the biggest accessibility issues Chad has that people just aren't talking about enough. Now, I say accessibility a lot in this episode, so we're going to call it Accessibility in the Smart City. Bit of a play on Chad's solution as well. So, as always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Chad. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Zoe. Very well. How's yourself?
I am super. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to speak to you.
Well, let's jump straight in. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Technically, my background has been in information technology since 2005. And I've worked on digital platforms, website content management systems, project management. But my passion is accessibility. So I have an undiagnosed medical condition, which is similar to spinal muscular atrophy, which meant I was walking pretty well until my mid-20s, slowed down pretty significantly over the next few years. And I've been in a wheelchair since I turned 30. So I'm really passionate about improving accessibility and making our communities and events easier to get access to.
I'm really passionate about accessibility as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm excited I've been following some of the things you've been doing on LinkedIn, and yeah, I'm so keen to talk about it. So let's jump in and tell us about what really sparked your interest in this smart community space.
So it would have been in 2013 when I did first start using the wheelchair. And I found just moving around, using public transport, going out to events really difficult for someone with limited mobility. So I had to try and navigate physical barriers that able-bodied people didn't really think about, like blocked wheelchair ramps, buildings with no lifts, if there's no accessible car parks, inaccessible toilets, or even railway stations with no step-free access. I think one of my favourite stories is I was trying to get a train from Sydney to Newcastle, and I was told it was an accessible train. So finding out I could get onto the carriage, but then the aisle wasn't wide enough to fit a wheelchair down. So every station I had to wheel between the two doors in the little entryway because the platforms were on different sides. And as it was winter, there was just freezing air belting through these vents on the doors for over 3 hours. So I thought, this really isn't a great experience. How is this info not available anywhere, or why aren't people talking about this? So that's when I started researching technology innovation in Newcastle, and I came across a group called the Lunatic Society. So locally, the Lunatics were championing the idea of digital transformation and especially ideas around the concept of adopting smart community technologies and how to solve real problems while making the local economy more resilient. So I'm on the board of management there now, and I do some co-hosting with innovation and technology. And we actually run the largest regional digital awards program for innovation and excellence called the Newey Awards. So it's been great to build a network of like-minded individuals and working towards similar goals in the startup and smart community space.
That's awesome. And I have heard of the Newey Awards, and I've had previous guests, I think Heath Rafferty received one or was working in that space. Is that right?
Yeah, so the biggest kind of award of the night is the Joe Award for who's doing the most, like the best work of innovation and community building in the area. And Heath actually won that last year. So that was great. Yeah, it's great to be able to work with Heath with what he's doing in community as well.
Yeah. No, I really loved talking to him on the podcast. Yeah, we had a really great conversation.
Yeah, cool. We actually both got a grant to work with the City of Newcastle Council at the same time. He did a great lunar smart activity in one of the civic parks in the town. And that's where I also started developing my accessibility app with City of Newcastle at the same time. So yeah, I've worked with Heath a fair bit. It's a great little setup we've got going here in Newcastle at the moment.
Yeah, I've been to Newcastle once, but not when I was kind of working in this space quite a long time ago. And I'm really keen. I've got to work out a way to come back there because I'm hearing so many awesome things. And I know it's such a beautiful place as well, but also, you know, you've had some challenges and Newcastle's had some challenges, and then, you know, really moving up from that space, embracing this kind of smart community concept, which is awesome.
Yeah, there was being the first city in Australia to have the Lockout Laws implemented and to see those start to get rolled back now. It's had a pretty big effect on businesses and just how people operate and how people do move through the city. So it's going to be interesting with some of this new smart technology coming out, how that improves security and how it makes people feel more comfortable moving through communities as well.
So what is a smart community to you?
A smart community to me is about improving outcomes for its citizens by enlisting like active participation in shaping the community they call home. So specifically, I want to see it being heavily data driven around movement of where people are going and more so where they aren't going. So if areas aren't accessible or easy to maneuver, where are those black spots and how can we resolve those issues to get more people moving around?
Yeah, I think accessibility is such a huge part of smart communities, and both from a physical and a digital perspective. So yeah, I think that's such a key component that we really need to talk about a lot more, because I sometimes feel like it gets missed or lost in the noise.
Yeah, now that we have the light rail installed kind of from Wickham that goes through to the end of the line, I've actually found that so much easier now to be able to mount on and off of the light rail than you do with big heavy rail, kind of needing the ramps to be folded up and on to try and get on the carriages. I can just wheel on and off on my own without causing much of a fuss at all. So a good solid 2 kilometres now, I can wheel around the city and catch up with friends or have meetings. So it's definitely opened up the city to make it more accessible for me.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And I think there's more needs to be talked about in that space of when we have increased accessibility. But then I think some of the challenges that only you would know as well, that we need to involve people that are actually having these challenges in the conversation so then we can actually get the best outcome.
Consultation is something that it'd be great to get involved in some of those conversations and see what's being done and if it's something that we might be able to improve upon as well. And that's definitely an area to be great to be involved in.
Now, we've talked about this already a little bit, but why do you think this kind of smart community concept is important, particularly for accessibility and I guess Newcastle in general, but also just in general, why is this an important concept to be considering and talking about?
Well, we actually have 563 local government areas or councils in Australia. And as they become smarter and are implementing change or technologies, this is where we can really push that consultation phase to work with groups who might have limited mobility and make sure that before a project's scoped and rolled out, we actually confirm first and foremost it's actually going to work and provide that benefit to everyone, not just those that do find it a bit easier to get around.
Absolutely. I think on scale, like you said, we've got so many local governments all trying to do not necessarily the same thing, but there's a baseline, there's common threads that are relevant between all of them, which is increasing accessibility and mobility. And what can we do to learn from each other? And, so we're not going reinventing the wheel over and over again, but also so we can learn and we aren't making those same mistakes.
And I think this is where some of that data security and the amount of data that we collect too comes into play. That, like, one of the most popular ones is smart poles and smart lights. And for me, I'd like to actually know if and how people are moving past those poles, what the flow of people is like. So if it's incredibly busy, if we could get that real-time data to know how many people are moving around, if it might be easier for me to go in another direction, and how that could be implemented with that actual smart hardware. Like, for me, a great accessible feature would be if we could even have real-time parking sensors or parking monitoring to know where we can and can't go. So to be able to plan a trip, like if you know that there's no parks in one area, you could then go somewhere else. And that planning component, I think, is what we're really missing at the moment.
Yeah, and that's such an important component for, I guess everybody, but particularly for people with limited mobility options, because, if you can't park in a certain area where you can actually access because of ramps or the grades of it, or, you've been mapping this stuff out, it stops you from being able to do what you want to do or what you need to do, what's necessary for you to do, which, is something we need to think about a lot more, that planning component for people, because, it can really stop you straight in your tracks and limit the amount of, services and those type of things that you actually need to get to, or in meetings and seeing friends and family. It's so important.
It's something that people from Newcastle probably laugh at, that apparently Novocastrians very much think that they have a right to drive somewhere and park at the door. So parking is very much a contentious issue at the moment in Newcastle, but especially for people with limited mobility. Like, if we have a look at the fact there's over 20 train stations in probably a 100-kilometre radius of where I live that are completely non-accessible. So when you're told, like, just catch public transport in, that's what it's there for. With over 20 non-accessible stations, that does still hamstring you a bit for if you have to catch a taxi to another train station, or if you have to walk 2 kilometres to get to an accessible bus stop, and it can take 2 hours to get in there anyway. Like, it does kind of get to a point that you need to be able to target some accessible parking and make sure there is enough room for people to be able to get in and out.
One of my friends who did a Winston Churchill fellowship, she was looking at inclusivity in public toilets, and she obviously looked at accessibility and that. And one of the things that wasn't really, the standards kind of, it was a standard accessible toilet, you would roll in, but she couldn't turn around then, like the lady that she was interviewing wasn't able to turn around in the accessible bathroom. You're like, okay, well, that doesn't work.
And there's so many different terms for accessible as well. So especially for me, I had to try and, like, in the platform that I'm building, I had to try and think, well, where do we draw the line that we probably can't put 7,000 bits of information in per bathroom if we can at least identify what the most accessible bathroom in the region is, And if you need an MLAC key to gain access to that bathroom, it's a better start for you to be able to get there and then judge what it's like around the area at the time. Because it can come down to what's the PSI required to push a door open and what the slip rating on a floor. So the amount of information that can be collected starts to get crazy. So yeah, you need to try and figure out kind of what that happy medium is and what's going to provide the best information for people to get out and about.
Well, let's jump into that. I want to hear about your platform. I want to hear about the projects and things that you've been working on recently.
Yeah, so the map itself is accessibility in the city. So on that platform, we've been working with some councils that have been able to give us some of their verified data. So that verified data we've got in there is car parks, toilets, if there's any lifts that can assist getting through the public space, if there's stairs that you may want to avoid. And we've been able to pull data from Transport for New South Wales to identify non-accessible stations. So if you do have a look at the map, you can actually see where businesses are, where car parks are, and be able to make some of those educated decisions. So we're having a chat to other councils all around New South Wales to see how they can get on board. And there's some really positive connections there and lots of people keen to get on board. So it's great to have people engaging.
That's awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about the interface? Who currently are your customers? Who's using it? How does it work? And what types of criteria and things have you been using?
Yeah, so I've got to say the biggest surprise of the people who were using it was support workers. So for agencies that have support workers that go out and work with people with lower mobility, they were actually genuinely surprised at the amount of accessible parks that they didn't know about. So it's something that everyone kind of has a rough idea as to, well, if I drive in here, there might be one or two parks and we'll just give it a red hot go. But when you can put over 200 accessible car parks for one region in, and these people just look at it and they're in complete shock as to, oh, wait, so you mean if we park up here, we could actually head up to the beach, there's 2 bathrooms, we can walk out to the end of the break wall and explore what's happening out there, head along to some other beaches where there might be wheelchair accessible beach matting. And the councils have had a bit of a process if they haven't already had that data verified and available. So we are able to assist with public space auditors to come along and have a look what's accessible, what isn't, and how we can store that information so that it's freely available on a map. So something that we really want to do is get this information out of spreadsheets, out of static PDFs, and get it into an interactive map that you can look at on any device. At the moment, we're running it as a mobile-friendly website. I didn't want to target Android phones or iOS phones initially. I wanted it to be accessible from any device. So it doesn't matter if you're on a tablet or a Windows or a Nokia phone. You can just go to that website and the map loads up. You can filter based on your needs. So if you don't drive, those accessible car parks may not mean anything to you. So you'll just unfilter car parks and then you can see if there's a non-accessible train station there, there might be a toilet here and be able to get a bus into a location where you might want to visit.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I recently was in Asia and I have to introduce you to my friend who has developed an app. It's called Tune Map. And it's doing something similar for vision impaired people to highlight any hazards because in Jakarta, the accessibility is very low when you're walking along. There's sudden drop-offs and curb ramps and things are very inconsistent. So she's developed this, or her and her team have developed this app. So I'll have to introduce you because very similar theories there, and it's all about increasing accessibility.
Yeah, for sure. There's an Another great startup I've worked with based out of Sydney called Bindi Maps.
Oh, yep.
And they're using Bluetooth technology to be able to guide people with low vision through whether it's universities and airports and shopping centres too. So there's some great low vision stuff happening at the moment too.
Thanks so much for sharing. It's really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Melbourne in May if everything works out. I'm really keen to hear more about it. And the reason I really want to have you at that conference is because I think for this whole smart community thing, it's such a key area for local government because they have that direct interface with the community, and increasing accessibility in our smart communities has to be, one of our key drivers for this. So thanks so much for, agreeing to come down.
Yeah, not a problem. And when we have a look at like the amount of people that this does affect for councils too, when I had a look at the last census that was done, like 20% of Australians have a declared disability. When we look at 6% of the population is under 4. So parents with prams are looking for easier mobility options as well. And over 14% of the population is over 65. So they may be looking at limited mobility as well. So I'm really trying to push this as up to 40% of the population are looking for easier ways to move through our communities. And it's something that councils, really need to get on board.
Yeah, when I was travelling around, and fortunate that I only had to experience, or I had to think about accessibility, was when I had my big luggage with me, and trying to carry it up and down stairs in London was horrendous. But yes, only very limited exposure to it. And so then that's what I was thinking about all the time. I obviously have another option, but people that don't have another option, it's something that can really limit your choices in life. And I just think really affect your quality of life, which is one of the key drivers for smart communities, is increasing that quality of life. So it has to be front of mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's talk about integration across different disciplines, government and industry. So obviously, this is some of the stuff that you've been doing. So tell us, how do you think we can better integrate? And maybe we need to put community in there as well. So how do we integrate better across different industries in government and community?
Interestingly, as you just said about travelling, from my perspective, and definitely don't proactively doing this, but having a decision maker from a council suffer a short-term injury really helped me push into one of those councils who actually fell over and really badly injured his leg. So that opened up a door for me to show actual decision maker how hard it is with lower mobility trying to move around. But across the broader disciplines, government, industries, I think we need to try and simplify as much of what we're doing as possible. If it seems too complicated, or we try and answer every immediate issue on the first roll of the dice, I think we see a bit of that analysis paralysis where everything's too big, it's too hard, it's too expensive. If we pick it apart a bit at a time and solve kind of some of those big wins for lower effort, that's the stuff that can really make it easier.
Yeah, kind of build that momentum, because I think, people do suffer with the overwhelm, because I think if we say we're going to increase accessibility for this particular, station, it could mean millions and millions of dollars of investment, which maybe they don't have right now in this budget, but actually can we look at it first and see the smaller things that we could do in the meantime, and then put it into the budget for next year or whatever to actually be part of a program to, do these bigger kind of initiatives.
Well, it is interesting that you mentioned budget. Some of the councils I've spoken to have been really on board, really keen. They want to collate the data if they don't have it already. And then some councils you speak to, like one person literally said, "Oh, is this a for cost product? Well, I guess we'll need to wait until a grant comes out or something." So it does feel like sometimes accessibility is a secondary thought or not budgeted for in core activities, which can be disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really where you identify the focus, right? And it is disappointing if it does come off as, that's something we think about later if we've got time or money for, which is, I think, again, I keep saying it, but when we're talking about smart communities, they can't be smart unless we're actually striving to meet the needs of all of our citizens, which the people that actually need access, people that don't have access to the network now, actually allowing them to have access, it needs to be a key focus.
And being one of the big drivers of the NDIS as well, pushing that social inclusion. So getting people out from their homes and joining popular events and making big events accessible, just to really improve that quality of life for people who aren't attending big social events now.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And I think it's unfortunate, like you said, that you need a decision maker to have an experience that they've got an injury or something like that to experience that limited mobility. It's unfortunate that we have to get to that. But hopefully if we share more stories, we can get it front of mind for people, particularly, large events and things. And it's, there's more and more technology available, more and more, infrastructure available that we should be able to really strive towards that accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it does cover such a huge cohort of people too, as I mentioned before.
Okay, what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
It's something that I think we've spoken about just earlier around that stronger data privacy. So the future smart community will be collecting huge amounts of data, and people are starting to get concerned over that data privacy, data protection, cyber security. And I think how we can collect that data but keep it anonymous. So for me, I really want to see where people are going and how they're getting there, and whether those smart poles or from their mobile devices indicating that. But to be able to see, even to promote for businesses if they're in a thoroughfare or if they're not, how they can make those areas better to draw people to them. And I think that's just going to really support small business as well in communities.
There was, I can't remember where it was, but when I was traveling, I was talking to somebody, Amsterdam, and one of their projects was it was called something like a need to know basis. And what they were doing was increasing the privacy for people with disabilities, because when they hired transport at the time, the driver would get all their details. They would just basically hand over the medical file, personal file kind of situation where the driver knew everything about this person. But they didn't need to know that. All they needed to know was the person needed to sit in the front left side and, was nonverbal, and they're going here. Like that's all they needed to know.
Yeah, you don't really need the full medical history to catch a cab.
No, exactly. And I think it does happen here as well, where I think we hand over, or, people have to hand over all this information, but actually it's not required in the service that they're getting. And I think that's so important to keep front of mind, because as we move into having more and more data, particularly people with disabilities or in more vulnerable situations, they think that they have to hand over everything to get a quality service. And I think that we need to move away from that. Yes, there'll be heaps of data available, but what is it that the service provider needs to know? And that's all they get, because we need to be thinking more about, what our data and our grandparents' data or our family friends' data, what value that actually has for us, and from a privacy perspective, but also a security perspective and that type of thing.
And that's where I'd like to see a layered approach to that security. So that tier 1 information might just be Chad's in a wheelchair and doesn't like to transfer in or out of a vehicle. And then layer 2 might be he is actually undiagnosed. He's gone through every genetic test under the sun and he can't do this. Then layer 3, he goes into specialist appointments or things like that. And depending on the service that you're accessing, you can then determine what information you think they need. And that would be a much better approach. And I think people would feel more comfortable with what they were then handing over as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm keen to hear, what are some of the biggest issues that you have that people don't talk about enough? Like, I guess those limiting factors that you could get on the train, but then you couldn't get off again. But are there any other things that they might meet the standard, but, just in reality don't work very well?
Something that people don't really think about, which I've started to try and figure out how I can implement it in our application, is inclines. It's something that sounds really simple because like getting in and out of vehicles is obviously an issue, stairs, lifts, parking. But when you have a look at an incline at, say, a train station, where I am, like Broadmeadows is an accessible train station, but there's an incline down and then up to try and get out, which if I tried to do that on my own, like the wheelchair would just flip over backwards. And that's where I've tried to, in the application, identify what an angle is, whether it be at a car park or if you're going from point A to point B as a part of that navigation. If it's over 12 degrees, then you might want to try and find another way to get there. So if you're faced with a 14-degree hill to get up, or you can go 2 streets up and it's nearly flat compared to going up that hill, that's something that I'd really like to prioritize, which a lot of people aren't talking about now.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy, his last name escapes me, but his name is Nick. I was on a panel with him at a rail conference, and he's a wheelchair user. And he was telling us how when he goes to the football, he goes to a certain station and then, goes from there to the stadium. But then on the way back, he'll take another mode of transport. I think he'll take the bus back to, go back to his house. And he's like, well, why do you think I do that? And it was the incline, because the train station was closer to his house, but the incline was too great, particularly after probably a few beers at the football, that he wouldn't be able to get home. So he'd take the bus, but then he'd have to wheel, I think, 1.5 kilometres rather than the train station. So yeah, maybe that station would be classed as accessible potentially, but you could get one way but not the other because of that incline.
And it can literally take one invert to change your entire direction of how you go somewhere. When I go to a bus stop or a pub up the road from my own house, I could go to one set of lights and cross the road, but both of the inverts are so steep to go either down on one side or up on the other side. It's just something that for my own safety, I'm not game to roll the dice on. So it's easier just to turn right, go another 200 metres up the road, cross at a flat set of lights, and then it's okay the rest of the way on that side of the footpath. That kind of adds another 5 or 10 minutes to your trip that other people can kind of bypass.
And I guess it's that planning aspect as well. Like you only found that out by doing it or somebody else doing it and letting you know, which I guess is the key component, what your app is going to help with. But, I can kind of walk around and not have to plan too much because I know I'll be able to, access. But yeah, if you haven't mapped out that route previously, it makes it very difficult. That I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak for you on that on that topic, but just the spontaneity of it is something that I think about a lot.
That if you are with someone, you're more likely to try new things. That if it doesn't work out, they can give you a hand to push you up a hill or go even on an angle. But if you're worried you might roll sideways out of the chair if it's a steep incline, if it's the only one way that you can go. But yeah, just the inverts too, especially as much as I talked up the light rail earlier, it's great for transport. But if you are going from one side of town to the other, you don't want to drop one of your smaller front wheels of your wheelchair into one of those rails and get stuck because of the width of it. So you have to really concentrate where those front wheels are going, what direction you're going, so you don't drop in drains, potholes, rail tracks. It's something you're always kind of leaning back a little bit thinking, don't fall out, don't fall out.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chad. It's been great to chat with you. And I really, really, really look forward to seeing you in May and having some more conversations. I really appreciate you being so open and sharing your stories on the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm so excited for your app as well. I'm going to have to check it out. Sorry, it's not an app, your application, your website to check out that. And I'm really hoping that, you can talk to more councils across Australia and get it open and into more councils. And if I can help you with that, do let me know.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. If you do Google accessibility in the city, we're actually ranking naturally really high now. So it should be pretty high up when searched for.
Excellent. We'll put the links in the show notes as well so people can click away. I need to ask you one last question, which is how can people connect with you?
So best way would either be from hitting the website, and I've got some contact me methods on there, but LinkedIn is another fantastic one if you add Chad Ramage, and via Facebook or any of the socials. I must admit I'm more active on Facebook than any of the other platforms. But yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn or via the website.
Excellent. We will put those links in the show notes and so people can click away and find you. And yeah, if they want to see you in May, hopefully they can join us in Melbourne at the Smart Cities 2020 conference.
Come on down.
Yeah, it'll be really, it's going to be a really great one. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, cool.
Well, thanks again. And gone a little bit over, but thank you for chatting with me. And yeah, look forward to our next conversation. We'll talk soon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Zoe. Chat soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.